Hi everyone. Today we are discussing an article released by the BBC on the 30th of November 2021, titled How Driverless Cars Will Change Our World. It's an article that, to be quite honest, just serves as a puff piece for the driverless car industry, and is quite blatant propaganda for a future that is far from certain. I've decided to make this video in response, because I want to talk about some of the serious flaws in its assumptions, its arguments, and how it wants to respond to changes in our transportation landscape. I've linked the article down in the description, so you can go check it out yourself, and make sure I'm not misrepresenting any of the points it makes. I won't be discussing everything it says, because a lot of it is just not worthy of discussion, but I will be talking, of course, about the key points and the overall major themes that we develop throughout this article. Because at its core, this BBC Future article makes some seriously wrong assumptions about how driverless cars will actually impact, and should impact, transportation policy. The article not only covers driverless cars, but other driverless technologies, such as a goal to create long-distance driverless trucking. So let's get started. This article starts out, as a lot of these tend to do, by talking about Waymo, a driverless car service currently under testing in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, I do want to give props to Waymo. It really is the only properly functioning driverless car system in the world right now. I mean, it does certainly exist. It does have cars without drivers driving around the Phoenix suburbs. It's normally quite a poster child for driverless car enthusiasts. But keep in mind, it's taken years to get to even this point. And there is one small problem with Phoenix, and that's, well... Because Phoenix isn't really representative of any real city. It's largely just a collection of suburbs in the desert, endless tarmac, and heat-baked houses. Waymo's fleet rarely has to interact with cyclists, pedestrians, roads that aren't up to the modern code, small streets, narrow lanes, nightmarish traffic congestion. Because Phoenix is famous for really just being endless suburbia, and any pretense this is comparable to a dense and populous city is wrong. The article says that cities such as San Francisco or New York could realistically see robo-taxis operational by 2023. Something, I might add, seems to have been promised over and over again for about the past half-decade. These cities are complicated, they're old, they have much different road layouts that are largely uncomparable to Phoenix suburbia. Of course, I believe that eventually these cities will have driverless cars, but 2023 is such an optimistic and largely unbelievable timeline. And even if it does happen, as can be seen on the Waymo website, the amount of New York these cars will actually operate in is extremely limited. This serves to highlight one of my core problems with this article, that it simply believes the driverless car industry when it makes such outlandish statements. Driverless cars have been promised in major Californian cities forever now. They were supposed to be operating by 2020 according to some major US car companies. But that hasn't happened. Of course it hasn't. Driverless cars are just so much more complicated than people originally thought. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think driverless cars will happen eventually, but simply believing in these outright outlandish timelines presented by the likes of Waymo, I believe is simply unrealistic. It's pretty poor journalism. The article also covers how driverless cars can improve safety, and could be less accident-prone than human drivers. This could certainly be true in time, But equally so, regular cars are starting to have a lot of the same safety tech that is found on driverless vehicles. The advent of the auto emergency brake, rear view cameras, lane departure warning and assist, and of course blind spot monitors are all features found on new, affordable cars. Driverless cars may be becoming safer, but so are human drivers at the end of the day. And more than anything, what results in the most serious car crashes is speed. Redesigning our roads to be safer for cars to drive on, and reducing speed is very important in reducing fatalities from driving. Saying that driverless cars are the best way to reduce road fatalities is pretty foolish in my opinion. Now, under a subheading of what the article believes we can expect 5 years from now, it talks a bit about what industry experts think the near future holds for driverless car technology. The article does, to its credit, point out that people in the industry do think driverless cars will take an iterative approach, and that does reflect the need to have more controlled environments in which to test these vehicles. And that's good. In my opinion, that's certainly true. There are applications of driverless vehicles that are certainly necessary and would save lives. Examples provided by the article for use in higher risk environments, such as nuclear power plants and military settings. Which, yeah, that's true. Those are definitely settings where we can reduce risk to people, and driverless technology can work in controlled environments at little risk to people. This article, of course, also brings up the concept of driverless trucks, which, admittedly, in theory, makes a lot of sense. Trucks travel a long distance, they drive along defined routes, and one of their largest costs is the driver. One of the most immediate things it brings up is the concept of platooning vehicles. The idea that multiple driverless trucks can drive behind each other and therefore be more fuel efficient, taking advantage of the slipstream effect. This is further claimed would reduce congestion as trucks would travel closer together. Now, if I ask you what sounds like a lot of vehicles put together into a line to become more fuel efficient and that also reduces road congestion, you might think you've heard of that before. Because it's just a freight train. They mean a freight train, that's what they mean. Trains have the ability to stack hundreds of containers along their length. They're extremely fuel efficient and environmentally friendly. More than driverless trucks ever will be. They are great at reducing congestion on crowded highways. Rail freight is already extremely cheap. It's able to capture so much market share because it's very usable for a lot of business, in part because it offers such low rates over longer distances. When people bring up they want to see more driverless trucks, what that realistically means is more congested freeways. As if freight is moved to road, that's exactly what it's going to mean. I personally see driverless trucks as a road to nowhere, no pun intended. The innovation really isn't needed, and wouldn't even be possible without the already massive subsidies provided to the long-distance trucking industry. The article further points out what it thinks is the ability of driverless technology to help connect public transportation systems, to make a driverless shuttle a quote-unquote true mainstay for European cities. Pods, like these would be, I might point out, already exist. While their application at the moment is limited, they have proven to be less than ideal and less than useful. Slower than a bus, with a lower capacity, still quite expensive to actually purchase, like as much as a bus costs, and the only benefit is obviously you don't have to pay the driver. Some of these, which are essentially worse minibuses, can often be seen around university campuses or along popular beachfronts, where they are restricted to such a low speed they are almost useless, and have such a low capacity that more than about 6 people can't use it at once. The idea that these pods can be a solution to any public transportation problem we have is simply silly. We already have small buses like the Hino Poncho if you really need it. It's just, frankly, ridiculous. This is, again, a solution in search for a problem that doesn't really exist anywhere that I've seen. I think the pod thing could offer some usability, such as in pedestrianised malls or airport terminals where you do want small golf cart sized vehicles going around, for people with reduced mobility in particular. But to say they are any replacement for a public transportation system, or even complement one, is just silly. As at the end of the day, as always, it just comes down to buying and running more buses. The next subheading is 7 years from now, or 2028. The article begins to look at potentially how our cities could evolve to accept driverless vehicles. For example, here's the ridiculous quote: "If you live in a dense, urban area, the hope is that you'll be able to rely on mobility as a service. You can dial up a car, it will arrive in 2 minutes, and you can make your journey. You won't have to have the vast rows of parked cars in your street, which makes the street more navigable for the automated vehicle." That, if you haven't figured it out, is just a taxi, or rideshare if you prefer. The ability to reinvent having a taxi as something cool and unique, because it doesn't need a driver and therefore we can redesign our cities, is stupid. Removing car parking is not something driverless technology is required for, because it's something we are more than capable of doing already. Car parking is inefficient, there's no doubt about that. It doesn't raise a lot of revenue, it costs a lot to build and maintain, so reducing it is common sense. But that doesn't mean the best way to go about reducing it is making cars mobility as a service. The article goes on to point out that without parked cars lining every street and road, they could be made more narrow, making way for green spaces. Something apparently we can't do unless we invented driverless cars in 7 years' time. Increasing green space in cities is obviously very important, but it's not the only reason to replace car parking. Bus lanes, cycle lanes, expanded streets for pedestrians, and outdoor dining opportunities are equally important ways that parking can be turned into more productive land uses. The article, of course, does not say any of that. Of course it doesn't, because after all, making streets more narrow only serves to benefit driverless cars. Maybe making the street more aesthetic as well, but because cities aren't for people, therefore the driverless cars of the future, why should we consider anyone else? Below this, the article states, "There are some people who feel pedestrians and autonomous vehicles simply do not mix." Who are these people? Who are we quoting here? The article does not say. The BBC article does link to a far better The Conversation piece about how driverless cars and cities don't mix. This article points out that driverless cars aren't the magic solution to traffic, and they potentially will make cities worse if they are redesigned around driverless cars. It makes some good points, and I recommend you read it. I've linked it in the description below, and I like it, except for the part where it says trackless trams. What's funnier is, despite the fact the article is linked, the BBC one makes no mention of any of the points it makes. It simply adds as an afterthought, "This could mean our cities have to be reimagined." Reimagined for who? Reimagined for what? Doesn't really say in this article, as it is just so willing to gloss over the points made in opposition to driverless cars. I feel I have to point out this is all the article gives credence to anyone who thinks there might be drawbacks to driverless cars. No, seriously, it's just this one paragraph that is clearly put in as an afterthought, as the author clearly read the Conversation article when doing their research, but didn't really bother to do anything about it or comment on it. There aren't any quotes from people who think driverless cars have problems. what these problems are, and how they could potentially be fixed. This article just glosses over this, as it's solely in the pursuit of saying driverless car are good. Might take some time to get there? Who can say? There is a third subheading, which is 10 years from now, which doesn't really have a lot of detail or say much of anything, to be honest, other than we could have driverless cars in 10 years. Probably not that much. Who can say? They'll be expensive, but maybe you'll use one anyway. But really, I don't feel that's worth covering. It just says nothing, essentially. So, in conclusion, about all this article really comes down to is propaganda for the driverless car industry. The article is so willing to gloss over any flaws in how driverless cars could change our cities, and cause further harm to balanced transportation planning. It just plainly ignores existing transportation technology, whether that be freight rail or public transportation. It simply glosses over these in the pursuit of more cars at any cost. The article ends by saying, years from now, we may be wondering how we ever lived without driverless cars. Because this article is so clearly written by a journalist with no understanding of urban transportation, this article is shameless in its promotion of driverless cars, and how they can allegedly save transportation, end congestion, and once and for all, fix traffic. Things that aren't proven, things that are only theories at the moment, and things many people believe will simply never happen. It's impossible for a driverless car to solve the absolute inefficient use of space that cars do represent. The fact one person has to lug around 2 tons of metal and plastic to go to the shops isn't going to be solved by making cars driverless. I'm not saying driverless cars and vehicles don't offer solutions and shouldn't be part of our future transportation mix. Clearly there are advantages. There are many environments where driverless technology offers affordable and good solutions to problems that already exist. For example, some of the best metro systems in the world are driverless. They move millions of people per day. But that isn't the same as saying driverless cars offer the solution to traffic, that they will make people more mobile and they will make our cities better. The article is frankly embarrassing, and that's such a shame because other articles as part of the BBC Future series are actually quite good. Many of them look at technologies that are already evolving and could actually save lives and improve quality of life. Driverless cars overall aren't one of those things. While I'm more than sure we will see them have an expanded role and become more prevalent as the years progress, they are currently largely expensive technology that is untested and doesn't really offer a transportation solution we hadn't already invented over 100 years ago. So I'll leave you with that. This article is bad, it just kind of sucks. This response video was extremely easy to make because the article barely has any good points. It barely has a point at all. I hope you look more critically at driverless car technology. Don't believe it will never happen, but approach it with the skepticism it deserves. Thank you for watching this video. This is definitely a new kind of content for me, and not something I was really planning on making. It just happened to be I was reading this article when I was on the bus home, and I thought it sounded really dumb. So that's why you have this video now. That's why I'm sort of just dragging the BBC, because I think the driverless car thing is quite silly. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing, liking it, and sharing it around to all the Elon Musk stands in your life who will be irrationally angry at it for some unknown reason. If you liked my content, I hope you keep coming back, and I will see you in the next video.